Welcome to the Exploress, time traveling through women's history, one era at a time. I'm Kate Armstrong. In the town of Barraclough, Sweden, lies a Viking grave so famous that most scholars simply refer to it as BJ 581. The skeleton there was found wearing a fascinating mix of clothes: a nomad's caftan, a riding coat of Byzantine silk, and a classic Viking cloak. More interesting still is the weapons they were buried with, more than almost any other Viking ever excavated. Scholars concluded that this person was once a celebrated warrior and a fierce military leader. And guess what? BJ 581 was a woman. Today, in our final installment of our Viking series, we're exploring what have to be the two most mysterious and tantalizing ladies of the Viking Age: the warriors that we call shield maidens, and the female sorceresses known as volvas. Lucky for us, we have a shield maid expert, Nancy Marie Brown, traveling along with us. Her book, The Real Valkyrie, makes for a fascinating read. Now, grab your favorite spear and a magical staff. Let's go traveling. But first, a shout out to some of my patrons. My newest pirate queen, Heidi. My new lady presidents, Jessica, Savannah, and Melissa. My warrior queens, Alexis, Kate, Amanda, Gail, Ika, Jessie, Jen, June, Neve, and Sloan, MCF, and Sarah. My imperial empresses, Faye and Whimsy Soapworks, Letitia, Alyssa, Sally, Samara, and Teresa. And my lady pharaohs, Bridget, Cheryl, Kot, Kate, Kimberly, Lori, Sophie, Laura, and the fabulous Courtneys. Patrons play a huge role in keeping the show going. Plus, they get access to all episodes early and ad-free, and exclusive bonus episodes, as well as full interviews with guests and much more. I recently posted a video bonus about Athelflaed, the Anglo-Saxon queen who went up against the marauding Vikings and won. To find out all about it, just go to my website. Before we're formally introduced to Viking lady warriors and sorceresses, we need to wrap our heads around the Norse pagan religion, as it will help us better understand them both. Scholars don't have a great name for the Viking religion. They usually refer to it as Old Norse Paganism. We'll simply be calling it paganism for brevity's sake. Paganism is an ethnic religion, meaning its beliefs and customs are so closely tied to the Norse people, geography, and culture that it can't really spread to places like, say, Arabia, the same way religions like Christianity do. And the way we interact with and use it is also quite unique. The main function of paganism is to maintain the life and health of the community, not the individual, and so the majority of its rituals are performed in a group. You won't ever catch a Viking lady kneeling at the bedside devoted to silent prayer. Paganism is about the here and now, whereas Christianity places a huge emphasis on what happens after we die. Paganism doesn't really dwell on it. Yes, the Vikings believe in life after death, and we have several realms to which our spirits can go. But our mythology doesn't tell us much about what these realms actually look like. And which one we go to isn't so much based on our sins as on our heroic deeds. The other big difference between paganism and Christianity is that the latter is largely based on written text and dogma. Certain authorities lay down a set of principles and say, based on the text, this is true, and everything else is false. Paganism doesn't have written texts, because we Vikings have an oral culture. There are no official authorities or dogma, so different people in different regions practice it in different ways. And that's just fine. We aren't concerned with who's right and wrong here. Over time, we start to mix Christian and pagan practices. We're a big fan of covering our bases. The Vikings practice religion simply to survive, which means engaging in certain rituals to try and ensure the group's survival, with, of course, the help of the gods. Our brand of paganism is a polytheistic religion that features two groups of gods, the Aesir and the Vanir. These gods and goddesses control certain domains of life on Earth, much like the ancient Greek gods. Njordr, for example, is associated with the seas and winds, so fishermen and sailors often give sacrifice to him before embarking on a journey. They might also sacrifice to Thor, god of storms, thunder, and lightning, to ensure their safe passage. The Old Norse gods and goddesses are petty, violent, and often manipulative, and much of Norse mythology revolves around them causing trouble. Okay, that's all fine and good, but where, pray tell, are the ladies? In short, in our mythology, they are everywhere. To start with, there are a number of minor nature spirits called Dizir, who represent the life force of living things, and they are all female. When it comes to life and death, Norse goddesses tend to rule the show. Many of the Viking death realms are controlled by goddesses. If you drown, the sea god Ran will catch you in her net and welcome you into her hall. People who die of illness or old age go to the realm of Hel, the death goddess. Despite the attempts of Christians writing later on, the pagan version of Hel is nothing like the Christian version. Our old friend Snorri Sturluson tries to claim it's a gloomy place, and that the goddess Hel looks like a decomposing corpse clutching a knife she named Famine. But we know that dude was pushing his own agenda. In earlier poems describing Hel, it's painted as a welcoming place, overflowing with fresh brewed mead. Hel herself is cheerful and comforting, exactly what you'd want for your relatives who die of illness and old age. And then there are the Norns, ancient goddesses who rule the fates of both humans and gods. Even the all-powerful Odin has to bow to these ladies, who sit at their looms weaving everyone's fate. In Old Norse paganism, women are powerful and important. The goddesses all have chairs and equal say on the godly council. Goddesses like Ymir, a physician, Sign, a lawyer, and Skadi, a huntress, all have significant power in their own right. But perhaps the most powerful of them all is Freya. We did a whole episode on Freya, so we won't spend too much time on her here, except to say that one of the things she's famous for is commanding the Valkyries. Who are they? I'm glad you asked. The term Valkyrie means chooser of the slain in Old Norse, and that's their job. Valkyries are warrior goddesses in charge of choosing which slain warriors will be carried off to Odin's feast hall, called Valhalla, or Freya's hall, called Folkvang. But these aren't Christian-style angels over here. They're hardened fighters. The Valkyrie is often depicted wearing chainmail, usually carrying a spear, that being Odin's weapon of choice, and riding horses, wolves, even boar. They also wear cloaks made of swan feathers, which is what allows them to fly, and artwork sometimes depicts Valkyries as having pointy faces reminiscent of beaked birds. Freya was likely the OG Valkyrie, but the rest of them serve Odin. They hover over the battlefield, reveling in the bloodshed, shining like stars to those warriors they deem worthy of honor. The Valkyries only choose the best of the best, as these warriors are meant to eventually fight beside Odin in Ragnarok, the fated battle for the end of the world. The sagas describe Valhalla as a merry sort of feasting hall, a warrior's paradise that looks a lot like Gaston's pub in Beauty and the Beast, where heroes spend their days drinking mead that comes from the udders of a magical goat and eating lots of good food served to them by the Valkyries. So, these winged warriors are basically serving wenches. Lovely. Except they are a whole lot more than that. They're sort of like Odin's honor guard. They fight beside him and serve him, although some disobey him. Take, for example, Brunhild, the most famous Valkyrie of them all. Once upon a time, this Valkyrie went about fighting in wars and killing all sorts of men. Until, that is, she got on the wrong side of Odin by choosing to fight with a king he didn't like. Odin decided to punish her by pricking her with a sleeping thorn, Sleeping Beauty style, and forcing her to marry whatever dude managed to wake her up. Gunnhild protested this, saying,
"I am a shield maid. I wear a helmet among the warrior kings, and I wish to remain in their warband. I want to fight."
Instead, Odin perched her on a mountaintop to lie in magical slumber until a hero came to wake her up. That hero, Sigurd, would go on to betray her. Brunhild would end up accidentally causing his death and then taking her own life. A powerful warrior woman felled by the love of a fickle man. The Valkyries don't often get fully fleshed out backstories in the sagas, but we do know some things for sure. They live to fight, they shun marriage, and they're bred for warfare. With names like Helmet Clatter, Shield Scraper, and Spear Flinger, it's not like they could be anything else. In the sagas, most Valkyries fight in groups of 10 or 12, just like a Viking warband, and they live with the same freedoms as men. They can choose their own spouses, fight in wars, go on adventures, and clap back at men who try to tell them what to do. Valkyries are technically goddesses, but they seem to exist in a gray area that blurs the line between god and mortal. There are even some mortal women in the sagas who are described as Valkyries, which begs the question, are the Valkyries just fantastical creations, or were they based on actual Norse women? Let's find out, shall we? It's time to braid back your hair and suit up. You can't watch a modern-day show or movie about Vikings without coming across one of our most beloved tropes, the shield maiden. Axe-wielding, heavily braided, fierce warrior women, often compared to the Amazons the ancient Greeks so feared. The term comes from the Old Norse word skjaldmar, which is a combination of the word shield and the word for girl, daughter, or virgin. Technically, it translates to shield maid, not maiden. There's a similar word in Old Norse, skjaldkuna, which means shield woman. In the sagas, shield maids and Valkyries are represented in similar ways, in that they're both examples of ladies acting in a traditionally masculine way. They dress like men and they fight as warriors. But while Valkyries are goddesses who serve Odin, shield maids are mortal women fighting mortal battles. Both have amorous relations with heroes, though, but Valkyries don't normally marry or have children. They are here for a good time, not a long one. Shield maids, however, do marry. And once Tom Hiddleston puts a ring on it, you'll be expected to hang up your sword. In the saga of Hervor, we meet a shield maid named, you guessed it, Hervor. This fatherless gal grew up preferring archery to sewing, and soon turned to a woodland life of crime. Eventually, she was brought to court to be punished. It's there she learned she was actually the daughter of a famous warrior, which frankly couldn't have been that big a surprise. She starts dressing in manly fashion, renames herself Harvard, the masculine form of Hervor, and joins a Viking warband to follow in her father's footsteps. Eventually, she leaves her warrior life behind to marry and raise 2 sons, because the sagas aren't about to let a lady be both a mom and a fighter. But other stories let the warrior women have their cake and eat it too. We're gonna meet one in a moment. What other evidence do we have for shield maids outside of the sagas? We have a collection of 16 books from the late 12th century, written in Latin by Saxo Grammaticus, called the Gesta Danorum. He wrote this mighty tome at the behest of an archbishop who requested a heroic history of Denmark. One section tells us,
"There were once women in Denmark who dressed themselves to look like men, and spent almost every minute cultivating soldier skills, loving a dainty style of living. They would harden body and mind with toil and endurance, rejecting the fickle pliancy of girls and compelling their womanish spirits to act with a virile ruthlessness. They put hotness before allure, aimed at conflicts instead of kisses, tasted blood, not lips, sought the clash of arms rather than the arm's embrace. Fitted to weapons' hands which should have been weaving. Desired not the couch, but the kill. And those they could have appeased with looks, they attacked with lances.
Saxo goes on to describe several of these women at the Battle of Bravallir, a fight in 770 between the Danish king Harald Wartooth and Sigurdring, who ruled in Sweden. He notes that Hetha, Visna, and Vebjord all led their own warbands on the Danish side, and
whose female bodies natured endowed with manly courage.
Saxo noted that Visna
was a woman, art through and through, a highly expert warrior,
and that she led the charge and bore the king's standard, or flag, a responsibility usually assigned to only the bravest warrior, because it meant you couldn't carry a shield. If the flag fell, the whole army would panic. When Visna was attacked, she didn't drop the flag until her right hand was fully cut off. But never fear, she made her enemy pay for it. Saxo tells us that he left the battlefield
with a lung protruding from his chest, his neck cut right to the middle, and a hand minus one finger.
Damn, Visna. Saxo's Gesta Denora is also responsible for the fullest account of another famous shield maid, Lagertha, married to the popular Viking hero Ragnar Lodbrok. If you've watched the show Vikings, as I have, then you know exactly who I mean. Woo, gotta pause to fan myself. When Ragnar set off to war, Lagertha went with him, and not to hold his mead while he fought on her behalf. Saxo describes her as
a skilled female fighter who bore a man's temper in a girl's body. With locks flowing loose over her shoulders, she would do battle in the forefront of the most valiant warriors. Everyone marveled at her matchless feats.
Ragnar was so impressed with her fighting that he claimed
he had gained the victory by the might of one woman.
They weren't married at this point, but her battle prowess had definitely piqued Ragnar's interest. He asked around about Lagertha, but she had less than zero interest in marrying some minor king's son. She chained a bear and a hound to the front porch of her farmhouse to scare Ragnar off. When he showed up at her house, she released the hound, and Ragnar strangled it, which, to my mind, is kind of a red flag. Lagertha responded by releasing her bear.
"You are an exceedingly perverse woman,"
Ragnar yelled as he fought for his life. Lagertha just laughed, telling her men to shoot the bear and spare the man before saying,
"And you're an exceedingly persistent man."
After that, she agreed to marry Ragnar. Minus the animal cruelty, it's a pretty wild engagement story. Their marriage lasts all of 3 years. They part ways and both remarry. But decades later, when Ragnar's kingdom was badly losing a war with some rebels, Lagertha showed up to help him out. Not deterred by being a middle-aged mother of 3, she sailed to his aid with a fleet of 120 ships and quite literally saved the day. Don't let anyone tell you that moms can't slay. As much as I'd love to put full faith in Saxo's stories, most scholars don't view him as a very accurate source. His history of Denmark was a heroic one, meant to show Denmark in the best light, commissioned by an archbishop with an agenda. The first 9 books are based on legend, and while there are definitely some historical events described that have been corroborated by other medieval accounts, others were clearly made up. Were his shield maids made up too? We have no way to be sure. Certainly, the Queen Theorborg of Sweden fits the bill as a shield maid. Hrolf's saga tells us that.
As far as her womanly accomplishments go, you could not find yourself a finer match anywhere in the north. While in some things, like jousting and fencing with shield and sword, she equals the hardiest knights. In that way, she surpasses all other women I've heard of.
When her father ordered her to find more womanly pursuits, she pointed out,
"Given that you have no more than 1 lifetime to rule this kingdom, and as your only child, I will inherit everything after your death. It's likely I will have to protect the realm from other kings and their sons once I have lost you."
Dear old dad decided to give her a third of Sweden to govern so she could practice ruling while he was around to advise her. She took on the masculine form of her name and insisted that she be called king, not queen. When a visitor rudely pointed out that she was, in fact, a woman with lady parts, and then proposed marriage to her, she grabbed her weapons and chased him out of town. Unfortunately, the visitor turned out to be Hrolf, the king of Gotland, and he did not take kindly to being chased by a girl. He returned with his army, and after a hard battle, captured the town and the lady. He told her that if she agreed to a truce, he would allow her father to decide if she must marry him. She agreed, and they were married, at which point she laid down her weapons and devoted herself to embroidery and children. Years later, when her husband is captured and imprisoned by an Irish king, Thornbjorg once again takes up her sword, gathers up an army, sails to Ireland, and rescues him, though her husband believes she's a man until she takes off her armored helmet and officially reveals herself. Ah, wife, fancy meeting you here. Have we noticed a pattern? First, that women can only be warriors if they remain unmarried. As soon as they get hitched, they all joyfully lay down their arms to assume their natural roles as wives and mothers. Second, when they're living that #warrior life, they are living essentially as men, because apparently violence is only truly acceptable when you look and act like a man. Call it what you want, cross-dressing, adopting a third gender. This detail is important. It will help us understand the archaeological evidence we've uncovered about the potential of Norse women warriors. It's time to turn our attention to the Upturn Dirt. Archaeologists have discovered a plethora of Viking skeletons buried with weapons. And because history tends to skew just a little bit sexist, most assumed that they were men. How do you tell, based on old remains and before the age of DNA testing, who is male and female? Here's Nancy.
Well, that was the question that got me started on my most recent book about Vikings called The Real Valkyrie, The Hidden History of Viking Warrior Women. And what I thought I was going to do was to write about how an archaeologist unearths a burial and determines whether it's male or female. And I found out that was not an easy question to answer. I thought I was going to be writing about bones, and I ended up writing about bias.
DNA analysis has confirmed that some of the bones unearthed since the early days of archaeology were, in fact, women. That must mean they were warriors, right? It's important to remember that weapons don't mean warriors. Axes and knives were common items to have. Sorceresses were almost always buried with axes because they were an important part of their rituals, and knives were used for pretty much everything. It was the Norse equivalent of being buried with your smartphone. It's easy to look at grave goods and slap Victorian-era notions about men and women's roles onto them, but when it comes to the Viking Age, that just doesn't track. The DNA tells us so. Men have been found buried with jewelry, weaving supplies, and other stereotypically female grave goods, just as women have been found with male grave goods. The items Vikings are buried with doesn't necessarily tell us exactly who they were. Plus, weapons weren't just useful in the Viking Age, they were also a status symbol. If you were wealthy or powerful, you'd probably be buried with one, even if you never used it in life. Think of all the kings throughout history who have been buried with fancy swords. Sure, some of them might have used them on the battlefield, but most probably only picked them up while posing for an official portrait to make them look extra important and manly. It makes sense, then, that the graves of wealthy women in places like Kaupang, Siuantaka, and Oseberg all contain swords. It doesn't mean these women were warriors. They were most likely just wealthy, especially considering their ornate jewelry, luxurious clothing, and the sheer value and volume of their other goods. Spears have been found in female burial sites in Finland, Sweden, and Denmark. But interestingly, they're positioned differently than when spears are found in male burial sites. Spears found in female sites point down on the left, while spears found in male sites point upward to the right. What does this mean? We have no idea. But spears are one of the most common weapons in the Viking world, used for hunting as well as battle, so we can't just assume these ladies were warriors. But look, it's possible that some of them were. In an ideal world, archaeologists would simply be able to test the bones of every skeleton in what looks like a warrior's grave in order to determine the sex. But there are only certain bones that can tell you if a skeleton is male or female, and much of the bone material has eroded so much it can't tell us anything at all. Plus, some of those remains have been lost over time, and the archaeologists who found them made certain assumptions about what they found.
Now, looking at all of the graves that are listed in catalogs as male, you have to wonder, on what evidence did you decide that this was male? And generally it was because there was a weapon there. So how would you ever find a female warrior if when you're excavating you assume if there's a weapon it's male?
Such is the problem when it comes to answering the question, were shield maids real? I can feel you getting discouraged, but don't undo your warrior braids just yet. Let's investigate some of the intriguing finds that suggest ladies were participating in battle. First up, we've got a burial chamber in Repton, England, excavated in the 1980s, which revealed nearly 300 Viking skeletons. Judging from the age of the bones and weapons, these skeletons were likely part of the Great Viking Army that attacked England around 873. I talked about this a bit on a bonus episode over on Patreon, which also features an Anglo-Saxon warrior queen, so if you're into that, hop on over. 80% of these skeletons were men between the ages of 18 and 45, but 20% of them were women. Now, they could have been the wives and slaves of the male warriors, following their menfolk as camp followers, supporters rather than fighters. But could they have been fellow comrades in arms? Maybe. We do have proof from a Byzantine source that Norse women fought, albeit in a different battle. John Skylitzes, writing 100 years after the event, described how Byzantium was attacked by the Vikings in 971 on the Danube River, and how the cavalry defeated them. As the victors were robbing the corpses of their spoils, they found women lying among the fallen, equipped like men, women who had fought against the Romans together with the men. So that's promising, as is the Latvian female skeleton who was buried in a dress, jewelry, and a number of weapons. Also interesting, she was buried without her head, and beheading your enemy was a pretty common battle tactic at this time, which may suggest that she was killed in the midst of battle. But by far the most promising archaeological evidence for real-life shield maids is the woman referred to as BJ581. She was discovered in the 1870s, when archaeological digs tended to be a little wild at times. Here's Nancy.
It was really drilled into me that the problem of archaeology as a science is that you destroy what you're studying as you're digging it up. Nobody can come back and redo that dig. So there's no checks and balances. You can't repeat the experiment. So the archaeologists who dug up the burial that I was interested in was working in 1878. He was very advanced for his time. He introduced stratigraphy, he took good notes, but he also uncovered 1,100 graves in just a couple of years. So he was working fast. He even used dynamite on one of them, which is another interesting story. What we have of that grave, this is Birka grave BJ581, is his drawing, his field drawing, which is kind of faded. It was pencil. There's some places where you're not entirely sure what he meant. And just really basic notes, nothing very elaborate. And then we have these boxes. Some boxes have bones in them, and then some boxes had artifacts in them.
She lies in a grave under a 13-foot boulder, the largest burial monument found at Birka. It's situated behind the main hall, off the main road, and looks out over the town. Its prominent location and size suggests it's the resting place of someone truly important, probably a chieftain or a military leader. So, of course, the men studying her at the time assumed it had to be a man.
So this is something that has been plaguing our understanding of women in the Viking Age ever since archaeology started, which was in the 1830s. They started doing this sexing by metal, and it hasn't really changed until very, very recently, when DNA testing started becoming more inexpensive. Let's just call it, not so complicated. And so in 2017, this paper was published that confirmed actually, that the skeleton in BJ 581, this grave in Birka that I was interested in, was female. This grave that had been called the ultimate Viking warrior's grave because it has every weapon known to the Viking Age, tested using DNA from several parts of the body as female. And okay, there was a big furor over this. They must have tested the wrong bones. They must have gotten things mixed up. They couldn't possibly. Somebody looking at those bones in the past had said, these are pretty slender bones. I think this is female. They're going, no, couldn't be. But the DNA was really, obvious. It was very clear.
Her bones tell us she was around 30 years of age and likely came from a wealthy background. At 5'7", she was taller than most people of her era, and she wasn't a local. She most likely came from southern Sweden or Norway. Her chamber is lined with wooden walls. At one end lies 2 horses, and at the other she sits on her leather saddle wearing her riding coat. Nearby are iron stirrups, a comb, and a bronze washing bowl. 2 round shields have been propped up against the walls. A long spear is stuck at an angle into the ground, and her weapons, including a sword, a battle axe, and a horn bow with 25 arrows, lay beside her. A game board lay nearby as well. But what does all of this actually tell us? The game board is called Nefatel, which we learned about in episode 3. It's essentially the Viking version of chess, and its presence suggests that she was a military strategist. The horses tell us she was an excellent rider and archer, because only 18 of the 1,100 graves at Birka contain a horse, and they were very valuable. Similarly, her bow is a Magyar bow, the weapon of the Eastern nomads. A recurve bow of wood, horn, glue, and leather. It's extremely difficult to use and can kill at twice the range of a longbow. Her arrows were armor-piercing with silver accents. Her double-edged sword was rare in Scandinavia, but common between Byzantium and Baghdad. This all suggests she was a warrior and of high status, and that she traveled often, buying exotic weapons with the money she clearly had to burn. So, back to the question at hand. Were shield maids real? Most likely, yes, but not in the way or number you might hope. There were no bands of female virgins roaming around killing people, and there were no Amazonian-style female armies. However, as BJ 581 definitively proves, there was at least one woman considered a formidable warrior, and who most likely held some sort of leadership role. Warrior women like her did exist in the Viking Age. Being a warrior wasn't forbidden to the ladies. If you had the skills and you were unmarried, you could be accepted as a fellow fighter. And based on everything we know, it probably wouldn't have been shocking.
We have this Victorian era concept that men are tough and warlike and women are soft and nurturing. And that's not really fair to the people of the Viking Age, because they weren't averages. They were individuals. So, okay, maybe your average woman was going to stay at home and take care of the kids, and your average man was going to go out and work and fight. But you had people crossing those borders all the time. Women who were big and strong, like our current day Olympic athletes or maybe Marines, would be able to be warriors. Men who got sick at the sight of blood might be healers, might be taking care of the children. There wasn't this sense, there can't be this sense that people were so rigid in their roles back in time, but we as modern people have gotten past that. They were more like us.
This was a violent society, and so most Viking women would have had at least a tiny bit of self-defense training, even if they weren't full-on warriors. And there were probably plenty of instances where we women did have to fight at one time or another, but who weren't strictly considered warriors. All of the ones who walked that path, in order to fit in, were probably living as, or at least in the style of, men. Speaking of feminine power, let's turn our minds to the other female powerhouse of the Viking pagan landscape, the volva. There is no organized priesthood in Norse paganism. Both men and women can be religious practitioners, but the majority are women. And practicing magic is often seen as effeminate. Why? Well, the goddess Freya is the ultimate magic user, and so it becomes associated with fertility and femininity. Also, much of Old Norse magic has to do with divining fate, which links it with the Norns and their weaving, which is, as we know, considered women's work. That's why, in the myths, the other gods tease Odin when he says he wants to learn magic. Regardless, Freya and her human followers practice a form of magic the Vikings call sther, which we can think of as shamanism or sorcery. This encompasses everything from divination and healing to shape-shifting to controlling the outcomes of battles. Not an insignificant power, to be sure. There is no single word in Old Norse for witch. Instead, a woman who practices sther was called a volva, which can be translated to seeress, prophetess, magician, or sorceress. Witches, as we know, get a bad rap through history, but the Norse don't view volva as inherently bad. Volva are simply professionals paid for a particular set of useful skills, and they can use those skills for either good or evil. Volva are viewed as wise and maybe a little strange, but they preserve the ancient ways and the old lore, and they serve the community in their roles as religious figures. If you need a ritual to heal your granny, a charm to get pregnant, or you want to know when the local warband might invade, you call your friendly neighborhood volva. Most volva are nomadic, and traveling is a big part of their job description. If you need the services of a volva, you are also expected to host her until the burial is complete. Most volva are older women, and sther is thought to run in families, so magic is a bit of a family business. Many women grow up learning from and assisting their grandmothers and mothers, because many rituals require the participation of others. Gotta love a lady coven. When archaeologists stumble upon the grave of a volva, they know it, because these graves tend to be fancy and fine. Volva are often buried wearing foreign clothing and expensive jewelry, which they often receive as payment for their work. Exotic items enhance their aura of otherworldliness, and they favor jewels from Arabia and Byzantium. One Norse sorceress is found with a rock crystal amulet with the Greek letters of a misspelled palindrome, Alpha Thanalba, or Father, you are to us, a well-known magical Hebrew word that was used in rituals in ancient Rome. We know it as abracadabra. It's unlikely that the volva knew exactly what it meant, but she clearly recognized the amulet had some sort of magic. These graves make it clear that religion offers these women a path to power in the Viking Age. Most graves also contain the remnants of a volva's magic toolkit, usually held in a small purse they wore on their belts. In one grave, a leather belt purse contained a razor, a needle in a bundle of yarn, a sickle of bronze, a piece of charcoal, 2 small twigs of bone and wood, a piece of bark, and 2 pieces of selenium. Other kits have been found with amber, quartz, roots, animal bones, and horns. Mandible of squirrel, anyone? Shells, insects, wool, pebbles, along with amulets and miniature carvings of snakes, chairs, and shields. All of these were likely used in rituals. It's probable that the plethora of animal bones had to do with the practice of shape-shifting, a form of sther shamanism that allows the vulva to shift her spirit in order to divine the future. Shape-shifting is a common theme in Norse mythology, with Freya, Odin, and Loki in particular taking on the form of animals to gain knowledge. But the easiest way to determine whether or not a gravesite belongs to a vulva is to look for a staff of power. If the identifying feature of a warrior was his sword, and it's a wand for a wizard, then the identifying feature of a vulva is her iron staff. Staffs are usually 1.5 feet tall, sometimes carved with runes, and topped with brass or copper knobs, jewels, depictions of animals, or even iron cages. Drama! These are extremely valuable, even more so than a sword, and function as a cross between a magic wand and a king's scepter. They're a mark of power and a useful item in a variety of rituals, many of which have overt sexual connotations. One poetic saga relates an elaborate feasting ritual in which a horse phallus is passed around to the female slaves, and they are expected to, well, I'll let you fill in the blank on that one. Likewise, vulva are described as riding their iron staffs, which are usually held between their legs. Scholars have suggested that the staff might be used for ritual masturbation, given the Vikings' firm belief in the connection between fertility, sex, and death. This connection makes sense, as Freya was the goddess of all of these things, and many of the funeral rituals of the Norse involve things like orgies and erotic asphyxiation. I just dropped a bonus episode about that very thing, should you want more info on all that. We're talking a lot about magic, but what does sther actually look like in practice? What are these vulva doing in these rituals? Unfortunately, it's all pretty hazy. The sagas don't spend a lot of time relating the specifics. The most basic ritual might simply involve leaving out food offerings for local nature spirits or elves during the late autumn to aid someone with health and fertility. The vulva might also be called upon to divine the fate of a newborn, lead songs and chants at ceremonies for the dead, accompany chiefs into war to determine the course of a battle through prophecy, act as an oracle to forecast the coming crop yield, and heal the sick with runes and charms. There are runes for pretty much everything: impotence, fatigue, immunity, and chronic disease. Similarly, a vulva might lead the ritual toasting and drinking at certain feasts, sitting in the high seat, or the place of honor, and would be responsible for sacrificing the animal the group would consume. Many vulva are buried with axes because killing animals, and, it must be said, sometimes humans, while presiding over death ceremonies is part of their job. What can I say? Magic is not for the squeamish. These rituals can be practiced anywhere. The Vikings don't have churches or temples. Many are held outside, near burial mounds, on high places such as hills, or along borders, doorways, or bodies of water, all places that symbolically represent portals between worlds. Perhaps the most common place for a ritual is the local chieftain's hall, although some larger halls have a smaller building nearby, called a hof, reserved exclusively for religious activities. These hofs are often treasure troves of excavation, revealing weapons, beads, amulets, and, of course, the bones of animal sacrifice. One such building, named Hofstadr, literally the Hof place, has been found in Iceland and was clearly used for ritual sacrifices and feasts alike. At least 23 cattle skulls have been excavated, all of which show evidence of specialized butchering techniques. A vulva knows her way around a knife. Some of this might sound trivial, even silly, to the modern ear, but you have to remember the era to which we've traveled. In this land of myth and legend, vulva hold a whole lot of power. In her book, Nancy pulled together dozens of sources to try and paint a picture of what a vulva's work might look like. Here's a snippet about a vulva she calls Gunnhild, which shows us what kind of power these women had.
The guests press closer as Gunnhild again takes her place at the center of the ritual, on a platform surrounded by a chorus of singers. Her dress stiff with gleaming gold and silver embroidery, and accented with glittering jewels and furs and feathers, bones and other fetishes. Her staff of power in her hand, fortified by alcohol, cannabis, and other herbs she lets no one see her prepare, She sings the songs that unlock the doors to the spirit world. For Gunnhild is a witch. Her song is a whirlwind, spinning part of herself out into the room until she snares everyone's attention. And this is what both thrills and terrifies Hervor, flings it out into the dark unknown. Over the drone of the long trumpet-like lure, the dark knock of the drums, the wild dance of the tongue horn, Gunnhild whispers, she keens, she chants, until Hervor rocks and sways to her rhythm. She breathes to it. Her heart beats to Gunnhild's time. She is fascinated and afraid, as all Gunnhild's listeners are, that the witch's staff will suddenly single her out in the crowd. The witch eye will fix on her alone, and she will reveal Hervor's fate. But the staff passes by, touching a boy instead. You won't wrestle with old age. A horse's skull will be your bane. It touches a young widow. From you will come a worthy family, for shining over your children I see bright rays of light.
Alas, when Christianity starts sweeping through Viking life, volva are seen as threatening. They're forced to convert or are burned at the stake as witches, replaced by priests who preach that women are weak and even unclean. The whole shield maiden thing is also killed by the arrival of Christianity in the 11th and 12th centuries. The church declares warrior women to be wicked and abnormal. For example, when a certain countess is captured in battle in 1071, was she a warrior or just stepping up on behalf of her town? Unclear. The local priest declares that she couldn't possibly have been in the battle. She was clearly only there because she was a witch, sprinkling magical powder on her enemies. Really? That's all you've got? By 1200, army training camps are officially closed to women. Fighting is far too violent for the gentler sex. Christianity also helps usher in the end of what we call the Viking Age. But the Norse have continued to loom large in our imaginations, only growing fiercer and more fascinating with time. That's the end of our series on life for the ladies in the Viking Age. If you want more Viking goodness, there are several bonus episodes waiting for you over on Patreon. Until next time. Thanks for listening. If you love the Exploress, tell a women's history-loving friend about it, or leave a rating and review wherever you listen. You can also comment on the posts you like best. This all really helps other people to find the show. You can also shoot me an email. I always love hearing from you. Thanks to Carly Quinn for all her help researching and writing this series. And to our Norse experts, Nancy Marie Brown and Eleanor Barraclough. You can buy copies of their books over at my bookshop.org website. Just go to bookshop.org and look up The Exploress. Much of the music in this series comes courtesy of Solace composer and Kevin MacLeod. Thanks as always to Mr. Exploress for my logo and Joshua Stackhouse for my theme music. Thanks also to the following for their vocal stylings: Isabel Salazar and Mele.